So in the last two videos, you saw how overheating the metal and putting too much solder on your joint created a flood. And so today I'm going to focus on showing you how to fix that and how to correct it going forward. I'm also going to demonstrate for you what happens if you don't use enough solder and how to correct that as well. So let's head to the bench and get started. So first I wanted to reopen the joint so I can show you how to correct not enough solder as well as correct too much solder. And as you can see, my ring joint is open. It looks pretty closed, but if I were to hold that up to light, I would be able to see light shining through it. So we're going to get to the bench and get that joint as close as we possibly can and get it ready for soldering. Okay, so as you saw a little bit earlier, the joint is open. If I hold this up to the light, I can see light coming through the joint. It's pretty close, but it's not quite close enough. So I'm going to take two pairs of parallel pliers, and parallel pliers hold things parallel versus like a V or like your regular pliers like this, where you can't really grip it very solid because this side is narrower than that side. These parallel pliers are even from the tip of the pliers all the way to the back of the plier. So I'm going to use these to get my joint close together again by readjusting and trying to get that joint as close as I possibly can. I'm going to hold it up to the light. I don't see any light through it. And the other thing I'm going to point out, this is a tip that most people don't know, is when you go to place your solder, if you see little bits of metal hanging out on the side of your joints or in the inside or even up at the top, that's called flashing. And flashing can stop your solder from flowing into the joint. So what I like to do before I try to solder is I get my joint as close as I possibly can. Then I run a little bit of sandpaper over the top of the joint just to get rid of that flashing. And then also along the sides. Make sure I don't have any flashing sitting on the edges of my solder joint. I also do it on the inside of the ring as well with a round dowel and some sandpaper just like this. I don't pay for the expensive quote-unquote jewelry tools because they charge you an arm and leg for those things, and this works just as good. I bought a package of different sized dowels, cut them down to length, and just used masking tape to tape a piece of sandpaper to it. It works brilliantly, and I can choose whatever sandpaper I want to put on it. So anyway, I'm going to do the inside of the ring, just enough to get the flashing off. And to make sure I don't have anything over the top. And now, what I just did created a lot of dust because the sandpaper's been sitting out on my bench and it's pretty dusty in here. So now, before I even go to the torch and try to solder this, I'm going to take it to the sink and clean it up really well and dry it off really well so that I can know for sure that that joint is clean. I know it's tight. Now I need to make sure that it's clean before I take it to the torch and go under the solder flame. Okay. We're here at the soldering station. I've got my fire brick, got my ring, got my hard solder. Let's open it up. I'm going to use the pre-cut pallions because they're small. One note about your soldering pad. Mine comes with third hands like this, but third hands act as a heat sink. So if you can avoid using them, do. Because then you'll be spending more time trying to heat the metal to get your solder to flow. And since this is a fairly big piece, what I recommend doing instead, and also because I only have one joint to solder, is take your fire brick and use your pick to clear out some of your solder brick and make a divot that you can set the ring in. So for example, I've got one right here that I use on a consistent basis. So what I do is I made it wide enough to fit my ring in, so I can set it just like that. That way I'm hands-free, and all I have to worry about is getting my solder pallium placed in the right place and heating my joint in the right place as well. So, or heating my ring or my metal in the right place as well. So we are going to go ahead and solder this. First, I want to take out my solder and place it on my soldering brick. I've got multiple pieces of solder here because it's so tiny. I'm using hard solder, by the way, because it's the only joint that I will be soldering today. So I'm going to use the hard solder because it has the highest melting temperature. I want to flux the ring. And I don't want to touch it with my fingers because then we'll get the joint dirty again. And I'm putting my joint on the top because that's going to be the easiest place for me physically with my dexterity to get my solder on the top and to be able to place my flame in the right place. So I've got my flux. I'm going to light my torch. Now remember, you want to create a reducing flame or an even flame, a 50-50. So you have 50% oxygen, 50% propane. So I'm lit my propane. I'm adding my oxygen, and this flame is about out to here. I'm using a UV filter on my camera, and I'm also wearing UV glasses to reduce the orange glare so I can see my soldering area much better, and so that you can see it on the film or the video better. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the ring and get that flux to turn white. Then I'm going to concentrate and pick up a piece of solder. I'm going to reheat, and I can tell by looking at this, my flame is not nearly big enough for the thickness of this ring and the size of the ring. So I'm going to turn this heat up just a little bit, get a much larger flame so I don't have to be in there nearly as long. And if you watched my anatomy of a flame video, which I'll link here, you'll know that a reducing flame or an even gas and oxygen flame will have a very small, slight area of yellow to it. So I'm going back to the ring. I'm going to heat it up. I'm going to place my solder. And now I'm going to go forward and backward on the joint. Then I'm also going to try and heat it from underneath to get that solder to flow down in the joint. And it has flowed. Problem is, there is not enough solder in there, I believe. So we are going to throw this in the pickle, clean it up, and then take a look at it close up to see if there was enough solder to close that joint. First, I'm going to quench it. Love that sound. So the ring is out of the pickle. Let me get my finger in there. The ring is out of the pickle. You can see that little bump of solder on there. So it flowed, but it didn't quite flow completely into the joint. I can see that there's gaps in the solder joint. So that means, and if I turn it to the side, you can see that gap in the solder joint there. And there's also not enough solder that has flown through the joint in the back of the ring on this side as well. So we're going to reset this and use another piece of solder, reflux it, reheat it, and try and get that solder to flow. Or at least we know we can get the solder to flow. We want the solder, enough solder to flow in there to close that joint completely. Okay, so I quenched and pickled the piece. I am looking at it now, and it's definitely not completely soldered. There's gaps on the sides, on both sides. There's gaps on the inside. If I were to put this on a ring mandrel and try to round it to make sure that it was perfectly round, that joint would pop open because there's not enough solder in there to not fill, but to completely activate all of the molecules inside the metal. So we are going to reflux this and resolder it with, instead of just one piece of one of these teeny tiny little pieces of solder, I'm going to take two pieces and put them together, and hopefully that will be enough to completely close that joint. So let me grab my tweezers, pull a few more pieces out. There's two pieces. I'm going to flux the ring inside and out. I want to flux it really well so that I don't get any oxygen or oxidation in the area that I'm planning to solder. I'm going to reset my torch with a nice big flame, an even flame or reducing flame with less oxygen. I'm going to heat my flux in the ring simultaneously. You see how everything's turning white. The flux will turn white and become sticky, and when it's turned to glass or clear, that's when the solder is ready to flow. So I'm going to go ahead and get this up on my pick, if I can get it. There we go. You might be able to see that teeny tiny little piece of solder on there. It's actually two pieces. I'm going to go ahead and reheat again, and I'm heating the whole ring from the inside and the outside. And as I'm heating it, I'm going to place my solder, and it should stick to the ring because the ring will be hotter than my pick. If I can get it to get in there. There we go. Now I'm going to focus my flame over the top of the joint. Oh, I just blew out. See, that happens sometimes. You get too close, you're not paying attention, and it puts your solder out. Plus, I was probably talking and going, put out my flame. Anyway, we'll reset that flame. Reheat. Heat from underneath, and I'm watching this little area where my solder is to make sure that it flows. And you see that silver flash? I think I may have had too much solder this time. That's the way it goes. Too much, not enough, and I think I actually have another joint over here from an earlier project that I was working on. So this is the joint we're soldering here. I'm going to go ahead and quench this and pickle it, and we'll take a look at it. Love that sound again. Okay, the ring is out of the pickle. You can see that nice little bump on the top there, so that is an indicator that there was too much solder. But when you look at the side, you can't really tell whether or not that's fully soldered. It looks like it is from the inside, from the back. Sorry, I didn't mean to bump the camera. From the back, it looks like the solder has flown all the way through the joint. Let me get my pick so I can point it out. So this is the joint we were working on right here. It looks like it's flown all the way through. It looks fairly solid. The sides, little bit to be desired, maybe. The other side looks filled, maybe not so filled. It's hard to tell. It looks really good in comparison to what it looked like before, because that whole joint was pretty much open and the solder stopped flowing once that reaction happened. So I think this joint would be okay, and the one true test would be to put it on a ring mandrel and try and round it up and see if it pops open. So we're going to try it. Okay, let's put it on the mandrel. We'll give it a few taps. Well, so far so good. Flip it around. And I'm not hesitating to hammer right over the joint, because if it's going to break, I want it to break here in my studio, not when somebody's wearing the piece. So it actually looks as though that solder joint was fully soldered, so that's a good thing. It didn't break. Now let's try and clean it up and see what happens. All right, so since the joint didn't pop open on the mandrel, I'm going to take some sandpaper. I'm looking at it under my magnifiers, and it actually looks pretty darn good. Those tiny little pieces of solder, when you get your joint just right and you get it nice and tight, you shouldn't have to use a lot of solder. If you're using a lot of solder, it's because your joints are not being closed tight enough, and more than likely that piece over time and a little bit of wear is going to pop open and break. So we're going to do a little cleanup here. I'm going to take my flat file. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup on this. There's a couple ways you can do that. You can take your file and just go over the top. I'm trying to figure out the best way to hold it so I can make sure you can see it in the video. I'm going to go straight over the top. I'm not pressing really hard. You really don't have to if your tools are well taken care of. I'm going in one direction over the top, and I'm removing the excess solder, which you all saw from earlier that there was a little teeny tiny ball of solder left on the top, which is okay. It's fairly easy to clean up. It's pretty clean. I'm also going to clean up the side and make sure the side joint is completely closed as well, because you can close the top side, but if you don't close the actual side of the ring, you could have some problems later too. That side looks pretty good. Now we're going to do the other side. And you notice I'm only using a forward motion on my file because that's really the only direction that's going to remove the excess metal. You can run it back and forth like this all you want. You won't have any control on the backward motion. You have all of your control on the forward motion. And honestly, really all that does is dull your file out quickly. So now I've got the top and both sides cleared out. I'm going to do the inside of the ring to make sure that my joint is fully closed there. So I'm using a half round file. And I'm going to do the same thing, only press on the forward motion. And the other thing I'm going to do is as I'm pressing forward, I'm going to twist my wrist like this so that I'm going kind of a crisscross motion with the file. That will help you in the long run later when you're trying to do the cleanup and the polish, because it'll be easier for you to get the scratch marks out. I'm also going to flip it around the other direction, do the same thing. The other thing I'm going to do is knock down the edges of the ring here, because I want to make sure that I've got all of that solder joint completely closed, completely cleaned up. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm going in and twisting. And I'm going to flip it around to the other side. And I can tell from a quick glance that solder seam is perfectly soldered. There are no gaps. I don't have any missing areas missing solder. This should be a nice strong joint. By the time I sand this down and highly polish it, you won't even be able to tell where that joint was. So, worst case scenario, if you don't have enough solder, you always can pickle, reflux, and resolder until you get enough solder into the joint. So now let's go back to the bench, or to the solder side of the bench, and flood the joint, and then I'll show you how to clean that up. Alright, so this time we are going to over solder this joint because I want to show you how to correct that. The joint's already closed from the exercise we did earlier where we didn't have enough solder and we had to solder it twice to get the solder to completely close the joint. So this time we're going to use my pre-cut, or not my pre-cut, but my hand-cut pieces of solder, and we're going to use 2 pieces of that solder, just like we used 2 pieces of the tiny little pallions. These are much bigger. You can see these are hand cut using solder cutters, and they have a standard probably 2 to 3 millimeter in length, probably 3 millimeter in length, and I use 20 gauge wire solder, so it's fairly large. We're going to go ahead and act as though we don't realize that that's way too much solder, and we are going to flex the joint. Flex the joint first. You can never have too much flux, so if you feel more comfortable dipping the whole thing into your flux, by all means do that. I'm going to do that now. I've got my 2 pieces of solder sitting right here. Oops, one fell down in my little divot here. Pull that back out. I'm going to light my torch, get everything ready just as I did before. This time I'm going to try not to blow out my torch. I'm going to heat my flux, heat the ring, kind of prep it for the soldering process. I had to fix my flame there. I'm going to grab those 2 little giant pieces of solder. You can see how big that solder ball is. I'm going to place it on my joint. As soon as it sticks, should stick as soon as the metal gets hot enough. Go over the top of the joint, and there you go. Solder definitely flowed into the joint, but now I have this big puddle here. You'll be able to see it better once I get this quenched and pickled, and we'll take a close-up shot of it. Okay, the ring is out of the pickle, and you can see that nice big flooded area. There's even a little bump on the area. So this is not as bad as it was a couple of videos ago, but you can still see from this angle, if I can get my little pick in there, that big area right here that's completely over soldered. There's a big puddle there. That's what happens when you use too much solder. And so we're going to take it over to the bench pen with the files and the sandpaper, and we're going to get rid of that extra. Okay, so this is our flooded area right here. We want to clean off that excess solder. And just like we did before, I'm going to take a flat file, go over the top of it, and clean off the excess solder. So I am going to take the flat file in one singular direction on the forward motion. I'm going to go over the top of it, and you can kind of see the bump there. And I'm just going to keep filing it until that excess solder is all gone. I'll turn it just a little bit. And one thing you'll notice is listen to the noise that your file makes as you're filing it. It'll sound kind of tinny and hollow when you're soldering or when you're filing over the solder. And once you get down to the actual silver metal or gold metal, whichever you're working with, copper, brass, whatever, the sound of the filing is going to change a little bit, and you'll know that you've gotten all of the excess solder off the outside edge of your piece. The good news is it didn't flood all the way over into the side joints. It only flooded the top. But we will check the inside of the ring to see if the inside of the ring is flooded too. The sides, there's a little tiny bit on the side, so I'm going to go ahead and clean up the sides as well. And you'll notice I'm also turning the ring in multiple directions too, to go over that joint in different directions so that I can make sure that I get all of the solder off of it. That side's good. Now let's check this side. Turn it a little bit. This side had a little bit of excess, not nearly as much as the top did, but there was still some excess solder there. So I've checked both the top and the sides. I've cleaned off the excess from the sides. Now I need to look at the inside, and there's a tiny little flashing of solder on the inside that we'll clean up. Before we clean it up, I wanted to show you right here. You can see that flooding that needs to be cleaned up. You can also see some flashing on the outside here and all this lovely silver dust, which is great. And you can also see there was a second joint there too, but ignore this second joint. We're concentrating on this one right here, and you can see that it's kind of flooded. I'm going to lift the ring and give it a different light so you can see a little bit easier. Oop. See that flash in there? That is excess solder. Ignore my dirty fingernails. I was out gardening earlier today. There we go. That's a better view. You can see that flash right there in the center. That's excess solder. We'll need to clean that up. So we'll take the half round file and get that cleaned up. And let's take a closer look at the joint. You can see a little bit of a divot there on the front of it. It's pretty clean. Looks like I've gotten all of the solder off, hopefully. And then, oop, darn it, I dropped it. So of course, when it fell on the ground, it fell completely underneath the bench, and I had to get down and do what I call assume the jeweler's position and get down on all fours to find the ring underneath my bench. But you can see that this side needs a little cleanup. That side looks pretty good, and we also need to clean up the inside there where there's that excess solder. So let's get the files and get that cleaned up. Like I did before when we were cleaning up the joint that had the perfect amount of solder, I am going to take my half round file and I'm going to clean up this joint that has excess solder on it using the same technique. I'm going to go in and twist. I'm not pressing too hard because my files are nice and sharp. I'm going to flip it around and get it from the other side. I'm going to go on an angle and knock down that sharp edge, flip it over and knock down the sharp edge on that side as well. And now when I look at that joint, all of the excess solder is gone from the inside, it's gone from the side here, it's gone from the top, and this exterior side is also cleaned up. So now I could confidently take my sandpapers, clean the entire ring up, and get it ready for polishing. So in today's video, I showed you how to correct the problem of undersoldering, meaning not having enough solder to completely close that joint. All you have to do is pickle it to clean it all up, get all the oxides off of it from the first soldering operation, place it back on your solder block, add flux, put another piece of solder on it, reheat it, let that solder flow again. And if you have to do it 2 or 3 times, that's okay. At least you know that the soldering is getting done and you're getting a chance to practice. Then I showed you how to clean that up. And also, because the solder didn't look like it had completely closed the joint, we did a test. We put that ring on a mandrel, used a rubber hammer to round it up to see if the joint would pop open, because we all know we would much rather have that joint pop open in our studio where we can fix it than to have it pop open on somebody who's purchased it and is wearing it around. Then we took and over soldered. So we had a big puddle on the top of our solder joint to clean up. And I think probably most of us are more familiar with that process than we are with having not soldered it completely. So I'm hoping that this video was really helpful for you and gave you some ideas about how you can prevent under soldering and over soldering, and also what to do in the case that you do. The more you practice it, the better you're going to get at it, and the less likely you're going to have too many issues with too much solder or not enough solder. So if you're a metalsmith that is beyond the basics, not quite intermediate or advanced, you're somewhere in the middle, and you're really looking for some additional resources and information to help you get through that point so that you can move forward and start progressing a little bit quicker, click the link down below and sign up for my wait list. You'll get a free soldering worksheet and have access to lots of resources once the mentoring program opens up. And as always, I would love to hear in the comments what things that you're struggling with, whether it's soldering or stone setting or making hinges or whatever it might be. I would love to hear about it, because my goal is to make videos that help you troubleshoot and fix these issues that you're having as you're trying to progress through this crazy world called metalsmithing. So thank you so much for watching the video, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Bye.